Former Fox News host Tucker Carlson interviewed Russian President Vladimir Putin. Russian President Vladimir Putin gave a more than 2-hour interview to former Fox News host Tucker Carlson, which was published online on Thursday. It covered a variety of topics, from Ukraine to the Russian economy, but did not bring anything new. Putin told Carlson that Russia had failed to achieve its military goals during the widely condemned invasion of neighboring Ukraine, and began the interview with a roughly 20-minute, mostly uninterrupted speech about history that included the days of Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia from 1760 to 1796. Carlson at one point flattered Putin and said it wasn't boring, but added, "I just don't know how relevant it is." NBC News did not provide any details about the circumstances under which the interview was recorded. Putin spoke Russian, and Carlson's show provided translation. Putin did not rule out that Russia could release jailed Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, whom the US says is being wrongfully detained, but suggested that the US would have to make a deal. According to him, there is a constant dialogue between the special services. "We want these intelligence services to think about how they can contribute to achieving the goals that our intelligence services are pursuing. We are ready to talk. Moreover, negotiations are underway," Putin said. The Wall Street Journal rejected Putin's claim that Gershkovich, 32, was involved in espionage, but said Thursday it was encouraged by any deal that could bring him home. "Evan is a journalist, and journalism is not a crime. Any depiction to the contrary is a complete fabrication. Evan was unjustly arrested and illegally held by Russia for nearly a year for doing his job, and we continue to demand his immediate release," the magazine said in a statement. It was Putin's first interview with a Western media representative since his troops invaded Ukraine 2 years ago. He made many familiar points, and Carlson rarely challenged him. Carlson constantly repeated lies, disinformation and conspiracy theories, and openly criticized US support for Ukraine, referring to the sanctions that this and other countries imposed on Russia in response to the invasion of Ukraine. Putin said, "The tools that this uses do not work." Putin also said he has a good personal relationship with former President George W. Bush. "I had that personal relationship with Trump, too," he said. Asked whether communication between the US and Russia could be resumed in a post-President Joe Biden administration, Putin replied, "It's not about the leader. This is not about the personality of a particular person." The interview was published on Carlson's website around 6 p.m. on Thursday, and was also published by Carlson's account on X, a social network owned by Elon Musk, along with Facebook and Instagram, has been blocked in Russia since the early days of the war. The Kremlin is preparing another expected election victory for Putin in March, and the Russian military is making progress on the battlefield while aid for the Ukrainians is held up in Congress by Republicans loyal to former President Donald Trump. Carlson, who was fired from Fox News in April, has since established himself as an independent journalist. Before the interview, he boasted that he was the only Western journalist willing to interview Putin. This claim was denied by the Kremlin, which pointed out that Carlson received the interview precisely because of his pro-Russian position on the war in Ukraine. Not only has Carlson questioned U.S. support for Kyiv, but he has also been featured frequently on Kremlin propaganda channels since leaving Fox News. Ukrainians were quick to criticize Carlson for talking to Putin while Russia continued to bombard their country. "I hope he will be asked why he is killing civilians and destroying residential buildings," said Andriy Yermak, chief of staff of Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. "Criminals should be judged, not talked to." Carlson also accused Western media of neglecting interviews with Putin, although they often speak with Zelensky. NBC News' Keir Simmons interviewed Putin in Moscow in 2021, and former CNBC anchor and correspondent Hadley Gamble also spoke with him just months before the war. In December, NBC News interviewed Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov. In addition, countless Western journalists have repeatedly requested interviews with Putin only to be rebuffed by the Kremlin. Peskov himself denied Carlson's claim that no Western media had bothered to interview Putin, saying on Wednesday that the Kremlin was receiving many requests to interview him. But Peskov also accused Western news outlets of being biased against Putin, adding that there is no desire to communicate with such media. He said Carlson was granted the interview because his position was different from others. Reporting from Russia during the war proved dangerous for domestic and foreign journalists after Moscow passed draconian legislation criminalizing criticism of its military. The laws have forced many Russian independent media and Western news organizations to move their operations outside Russia. 2 American journalists are in custody in Russia. Dershowitz is still awaiting trial after being detained last spring on espionage charges that his employer and the U.S. government vehemently deny. Alsu Kamasheva, a Russian-American reporter for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty (RFERL), was detained in October and charged with failure to register as a foreign agent. RL is a non-profit news organization funded by the U.S. Agency for Global Media. Tucker Carlson needs to focus on his journalism and stop attacking other journalists. Otherwise, he will look like the worst kind of shock jock denialist. Tim Dawson, Deputy Secretary General of the International Federation of Journalists, said in a statement. For NBC News, any honest attempt to understand President Putin is welcome. It's sad that Tucker Carlson is promoting his interview with baseless insults and lies. Putin rarely speaks to the public and relies on prepared speeches and official events to make his case against the West. In December, he held his first major press conference since the war began, a carefully orchestrated event in which only one Western media outlet was given the opportunity to ask a question. Carlson openly questioned a support for QIV, accused Washington of provoking Russia to invade, and criticized the Ukrainian government. He is popular in Russia and is regularly cited by Russian propaganda media as an authoritative, pro-Moscow voice in the United States. In the days leading up to the interview, Russian state media closely followed Carlson's every move, feverishly reporting on his trips to the Bolshoi Theater and the Russian version of McDonald's. For Putin, Carlson's visit was a welcome distraction from a grim winter in which Russia faces a widespread public services crisis, growing protests from soldiers' wives and a potential challenge from Boris Nadezhdin, a surprisingly popular anti-war politician. Carlson's help is invaluable to Putin. Abbas Galyamov, a Russian political scientist and former speechwriter for Putin, said on his Telegram channel. It's impossible to find momentum domestically, so Carlson is the best hope here. Fox News parted ways with Carlson in April after agreeing to pay Dominion Voting Systems nearly $800 million to avert a libel lawsuit that had cast a shadow over the network's future. In the lead-up to Dominion's trial, internal emails from Carlson were released showing him criticizing Trump and acknowledging that claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election were unfounded. He has since launched a show on X and a subscription-based streaming service. Shortly after leaving Fox News, Carlson also received job offers from the Russian propaganda network and Vladimir Solovyev, a pro-Kremlin propagandist and commentator on Russian state television. But Carlson decided to create his own brand. In recent months, he has interviewed Hungary's autocratic leader Viktor Orban and Argentina's right-wing president, Javier Milei. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said earlier Thursday that no one in the United States should be misled by Putin's attempts to justify the invasion of Ukraine. He invaded a neighboring country without provocation. Ukraine posed no threat to anyone, and the American people understand that. And the American people understand what Ukraine is fighting for, Kirby said. Remember, you are listening to Vladimir Putin, Kirby said at the briefing. And you shouldn't take everything he says at face value.